The story of God protecting baby Moses, or as it's sometimes called, the story of Moses and the bulrushes, which were just high grass, the reeds growing along the Nile River, is found in Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 10. The story is very familiar and very similar to the story of Jesus and his birth. If you remember, Herod tried to have Jesus killed. Jesus would grow to be the deliverer of all people. And in that sense, this story is about God sovereignly protecting this child that would grow to be the deliverer of his people. So if you're teaching this story to kids, one of the points that I would make, one of 3 points, if not all 3, one of the points I would make is that God was able to sovereignly protect this baby, this child, who was going to grow up to be the deliverer of his people. The second point I would make, if you're able, is that the Israelite people were products of God's miraculous power. That's actually one of the underlying story points of this entire narrative that includes Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Bible, what we sometimes call the Pentateuch. One of the underlying themes or points of this story is that the Israelite people were a miraculous people. God brought them into existence miraculously. So these early readers of this story had already seen that Isaac was a miraculous baby born through miraculous circumstances surrounding Abraham and Sarah. And they'd seen really more than once that God had divinely orchestrated their conception and birth as a people. Now we see again this same principle, this same point made in the story of Moses, that God was able to bring his people about and bring out a deliverer and then bring them through the Exodus and bring them into a national status by his miraculous power. God's people are a miraculous people. And by the way, that's an important point for all of us as God's people today to understand. We're not Christians simply because of a list of things we believe. We're Christians because of what God has done inside of us. He's performed a miraculous work of his Spirit in our lives, and that's what makes us his people. The third point I would make when it comes to the story of Moses, God protecting Moses as a baby, was that it points out God's ability to accomplish his purposes in spite of the circumstances. In every situation of life, God has plans. He has things he wants to do, things he wants to accomplish, and God is able to accomplish his purposes no matter what the circumstances are. So if you're teaching this story to kids, I would highlight one or all of these 3 points. That God sovereignly protected this child, that the Israelite people were products of God's miraculous power, very important point, and then I would make the point that God is able to accomplish his purposes no matter what the circumstances are.